G'day and thanks for tuning into the official Mechanic.com.au podcast, Australia's #1 podcast for automotive service and repair. In each episode, we interview experts from all different areas of the automotive industry, and the best part is, you get to ask the questions. To find out who we're interviewing next and submit your question, head over to Mechanic.com.au. And if you aren't already a member, make sure you create a free account. In this week's episode of the Mechanic.com.au podcast, we're joined by James Filchie of NGK. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, mate. Let's jump into it by telling us a little bit about a day in the life at NGK.
Okay, I'm the senior product manager at NGK. I've basically managed the product management team, and our key responsibilities are to determine what products are distributed by NGK Australia, getting these products ready for sale, so it includes pricing, packaging and cataloguing, and we also provide technical support to our sales team.
Fantastic, and that's going to be one of the things that sort of govern this podcast. You've got some technical questions from the Mechanic.com.au community in there, as well as some just general questions about NGK's product range. And as you're probably familiar, what we do prior to each podcast is throw open to our community for those questions. So if it's all right with you, we'll just start and charge through them.
Yep, sounds good.
Excellent. All right, the first question we've got for you, mate, is NGK's stance on using copper paste on spark plug threads. Now, this is something I know some mechanics do it religiously, some mechanics steer away from it. What's NGK's stance on doing that and why?
So the use of anti-seize, or we call it anti-seize, or copper paste, on threads of spark plugs is in relation to installation torque. So basically all spark plugs have a recommended tightening torque. And these torques are based on a dry thread. So the issue we have with putting copper paste or anti-seize on these threads is it lubricates the thread, and then when you're torquing the spark plug with a torque wrench, you can mistakenly over-torque the spark plug and potentially break the metal body. So NGK's stance is basically we don't recommend it. The reason why I guess some people want to put it on is so that the plugs don't corrode and they can remove them when it comes time to servicing. And all of our plugs are coated, the metal bodies are coated with a trivalent plating, which basically prevents it from corroding and becoming stuck in the engine. And so for this reason, we don't recommend putting it on. That said, though, there are some other brands out there which don't have this special plating on their metal bodies. And these plugs, usually the metal body's black. It's basically steel with a coat of paint. And in this instance, it is recommended. And then I guess to get around the issue with over-torquing the spark plug, there's also another method rather than tightening it to a specific torque, is to tighten it to a certain angle. So basically you screw the plug until it's seated and then tighten another half turn and that'll be the correct torque.
So as far as NGK plugs are concerned, don't use any anti-seize or copper paste or anything of that nature on them?
That's it.
Good stuff. All right, the next question we've got here is from Mark Williams. Mark says that he's found that NGK ignition leads seem to be too long. Firstly, can you confirm, are NGK ignition leads made longer than the original equipment spec, or are they the same? And what might be the reason behind his question there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually never had this feedback before. Our leads are basically manufactured to be the equivalent to OE. And I guess if Mark's got any specific examples of models or part numbers that he could provide us, I'd like to look into this further because, this question surprises me.
Yeah, sure. And one of the things that crops up in my mind is sometimes, depending on the engine, the routing of leads also plays a part in that as well, doesn't it? So maybe if the ignition leads aren't routed correctly, they may appear to be longer or shorter than they're meant to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's it. The engine bays have clips in certain places, and if it's not put in exactly as it was as OE, then yes, they might appear to be too long or too short, I guess.
And just while we're on the topic of leads, the next question I've got in here is why are different plug-in lead types sometimes required for LPG vehicles?
Yeah, so when a car's converted to LPG, there's two main factors to consider. So the first one is LPG burns hotter than petrol, and the other one is that LPG increases the voltage requirement to throw a spark at the electrode gap. So basically, we try and offset these two factors by making two, general rule suggestions. First one is to use a spark plug that is one heat range colder than standard. This is to compensate for the increased combustion temperatures. The reason for this as well, regardless of the spark plug design, the operating temperature is always the same, between 450 and 900 degrees. So if you've increased the combustion temperatures, then a spark plug that's one heat range colder can dissipate heat more efficiently. That'll help keep it within that range. And then the second rule, so converting to LPG, it's harder to throw a spark. So we also recommend reducing the gap size by 0.1 of a millimetre. And these are just general rules, and they might need to be tailored to each application because basically it's considered as a modification. But basically, if you experience any kind of like misfire when you're on LPG, but not on petrol, particularly under acceleration, that's a gap-related issue, and the fix is to reduce the gap.
Gotcha. So that's a good starting point to work from, but obviously, depending on the application, that there may be more fine-tuning required.
That's right, yeah.
And that one might actually it leads into my next question. This is around performance engines or performance vehicles. What should be taken into account when selecting a spark plug for a performance application, such as forced induction or a high displacement engine, and what considerations should be made during that process? All
right. So forced induction, there's basically two main factors to consider, which are the same as LPG. So forced induction increases the combustion temperatures, and forced induction also increases the voltage requirement to throw a spark. So, like I said, exactly the same as LPG. So again, for these modified engines with forced induction, we recommend again going one heat range colder for every sort of 10 psi that's been added. This will compensate for the increased temperatures, and reducing electrode gap again, because it's the combustion chamber's under high pressure. It's harder for it to throw a spark. So by reducing the gap, that takes the load off the system. As long as you've got a healthy ignition coil and all that, then it should be no problem.
Yeah, sure. So similar reason to LPG. Obviously, different influences behind it, but it's still the same logic that you need to apply to it.
Yeah, and these are all general rules. There's many other factors that can affect the performance of the spark plug, like how it's tuned. Because if you've increased the combustion pressures, but if the car's running richer, that will also drop the temperature down. So once the car's tuned, you've got it running the way you want, then we recommend adjusting the heat range of the gap finally to match it. We always recommend a conservative approach at the start, like go cold and then step it back to a warmer plug if you need to.
Gotcha. Good advice. Now, the next question that we'll bump into is concerning NGK's range of oxygen sensors, so the NTK range. This question is from Ray. Ray asks, is it worth replacing old oxygen sensors? The figures he's used is with 200,000 kilometres on it. Even if they appear to be working, will it make a difference to fuel economy?
Yeah, so like all other vehicle components, oxygen sensors do age and the performance slowly deteriorates. So this is due to varying contaminants the sensor is exposed to in the exhaust, which deposit on the ceramic element and slow down the sensor's switching speed, which reduces its performance. So NGK, we don't actually have a recommended service interval for oxygen sensors like we do spark plugs, but it is an item we recommend checking at sort of every major service to make sure it is operating correctly. But in this example that Ray's given of 200,000 kilometres, so even if your check engine light isn't on, that sensor's still been exposed to a wide variety of contaminants over many years and kilometres, so it probably will have slowed down significantly. And there's definitely a benefit replacing those sensors. I would expect to see improvements in fuel economy.
Absolutely, and yeah, as you say, just because the sensor hasn't completely failed and thrown a check light, it's certainly deteriorated in that time span. So, and we've also got a number of articles concerning O2 sensors on the mechanic.com.au website for anybody who's interested in having a squiz. The next one we've got here is from Jace. Jace says, I'm a big supporter of NGK spark plugs, having used them for over 15 years. But he's noticed that some of the range through his main supplier are more expensive than genuine spark plugs, which is making it somewhat harder for him to sell to customers. Why might this be, and how would you suggest he tackles those instances? Yeah,
so we supply spark plugs to the OEM, the OES and the aftermarket customers. Legally, we can't influence the pricing beyond our price to those customers. So what markups they have is up to them. But sometimes there are discrepancies in the market, and basically, if you can provide any specific examples, I'd be interested to look into it and investigate them further.
And just one other thing I'd throw in there for Jace is maybe have a chat to his local rep of his supplier, whoever that may be, because as James mentioned, at the end of the day, they're the ones who are dictating the pricing, not necessarily the manufacturer. So thanks for that one, James. The next one we've got is regarding glow plugs. What is the general service life of a glow plug? And does NGK recommend inspection or testing of glow plugs at service intervals?
Yeah, so glow plugs, they're, again, not a regular service item. They're an item that is just basically checked at every major service to see if it's still operating. A glow plug is quite a simple product. It's basically a heating element, and as long as that heating element is intact and it's got enough current provided to it, the glow plug will work. So we basically recommend just checking them at every major service, and this can be done by measuring the resistance through the heating element, and we've got in our catalogue some data which gives the resistance ranges of what's acceptable and what's not, and going from there.
Certainly. Is that catalogue's available online as well? Am I right?
We've got a part finder online. There is a tech section on our website which has this information, and then we have our catalogue in printed form as well.
Awesome. All right, the next question jumps back to O2 sensors. This one's from Dean. Dean asks that he's noticed that some aftermarket oxygen sensors, not necessarily NGK, or NTK rather, seems to have some issues on Commodores and Subarus. Are you aware of any issues on Commodores or Subarus?
Yeah, so I've never received feedback with an issue with our Subaru listings. We did, however, have some feedback regarding our VE Commodore Ranger a couple of years ago. This issue was related to the heater circuit, which caused a check engine light to come on. And for us, it was very difficult to pinpoint the cause, as the sensor operated correctly in most instances. So it's just a very small percentage of vehicles there that were not accepting this sensor. But we were able to modify our parts slightly, and we performed multiple test fits and found a solution. And that the new number's now out in the market, and we haven't received any more feedback. Okay. So the issue should be resolved. Yeah,
good stuff. And I mean, in future, if there's anybody or any of the listeners come across these things, you can always post in our private Facebook group, or NGK, of course, got their great technical support hotline that you can hit them up on.
Yeah, I mean, any feedback like this, we'd like to hear it, because that's usually how we find out, is from the market.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things. I mean, while there may, once in a blue moon, but if a problem does crop up, if you don't know about it, there's not much you can do about it either. So, it's great to get that kind of feedback.
Yeah.
So that just about brings us to the end, James. Thanks a lot for taking the time out of your day to have a chat to us. And moving forward, if there's anybody that wants to lodge any other questions to NGK, just remember that they're around in the community and they're to help you out. So, thanks again for joining us, James.
Thank you for having me, and I'm happy to help out with any future questions.
Good stuff. I'll talk to you next time.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the mechanic.com.au podcast. If you know anyone who might also get some value out of this episode, make sure you hit that share button. Keep your eyes peeled for the announcement of the next mechanic.com.au podcast to find out who we're interviewing and how you can get your questions answered. See you next time.